'Twas the week before Christmas, and all through the land, the rebellion was testing, for its takeover was at hand. Spotlight was coming, we gather our deck list to teach the MTG world the meaning of resist.
We got Lords for your hordes. Comment below as we walk through Week 5 of Foundation Standard. Alrighty folks, this week we went through 11 major tournaments, encompassing 88 top 8 spots, but none bigger than the Arena Championship. If you missed out on this tournament, it's probably because Wizards is fucking awful at advertising or promoting competitive play, but not to worry, we've got you covered. Coming in at the top of the tier list, despite being notably absent from the Arena Championship, was Boros Auras with 12 top 8s and three trophies.
Woo. Coming in second is Dimir Aggro with 18 top 8s and a single trophy this past weekend. However, it made up more than 40% of the Arena Championship meta, and we've watched this archetype redefine standard this season, making it first on our Overlord's Christmas ban list.
Third place went to Gruul Aggro, taking down the Arena Championship while placing 8 other players into various top 8s. We'll break this down a little bit further, but watching the chess match between this archetype and Dimir over the weekend, Max, that was a thing of beauty.
It sure was. Fourth place goes to Jeskai Convoke with 7 top 8s and a trophy over the weekend. 2 weeks ago, we called the rise of this deck when Dimir cut out all the control and ramp lists filled with sweepers. And here we are now watching this deck absolutely shitstomp Dimir until they start playing sweepers of their own.
Over in Tier 2 land, we begin with Mono Red Aggro, boasting 4 top 8s and 2 trophies this past weekend. Now, Mono Red didn't perform well at the biggest tournament, but it quietly succeeded nonetheless everywhere else.
Oh yeah, and next up are those pesky overlords, as Xur manages 11 top 8s this weekend, though not a single trophy. Can Xur find a way through this wall of aggression before Atlanta? We'll find out.
Simic Terror came in 7th with 8 top 8s, though no hardware for our Serpents. The next evolution in this archetype has arrived though, so we'll have to see what that means for the meta, and we'll be covering that in a bit.
And last but not least, Golgari Demons clawed its way onto the end of the tier list with 4 top 8s and a single trophy. Have we seen the last gasp of Unholy Annex mid-range this year? We'll cover that momentarily.
I'll be highlighting Golgari Roots over in Brewer's Corner.
And I'll be showing off Mono Black Skeletons. Now let's kick things off with our Tier 1 archetypes, beginning with Boros Auras.
Alrighty, Lost Wanderer took down a 32-player MTGO challenge this past weekend with Boros Auras as one of 3 individuals to win some nice hardware and take it home with the Enchanted Mice, and let's take a look at what they're doing. Now, as you can see here, there's a 12-mouse package with 4 Hired Claw and 3 to 4 powerful 3-drops. Seems to be the backbone of those red-based aggro decks right now, and we're seeing that here as well. This one, however, is trying to gain an edge against the red aggro mirror because of Sheltered by Ghosts, Lightning Helixes, and Shard Mage's Rescue. It also tends to help against black-based mid-range lists that have access to upgraded removal, and you have instant speed hexproof against them, which has mattered a great deal. Now, white is proving to have some of the strongest hate cards post-board as well. Rest in Peace is efficient at crippling Simic Terror, Temur Otters, and your odd reanimator strategies. And really, it's good in this kind of list because you are putting so much aggression on the board that if you land a hate piece and they can't answer it immediately, it's like you time walked them a couple of turns. And when you're playing aggro, that is damning to deal with.
It sure is. It makes me want to ask my question here. The 3 copies of Restless Bivouac, is this correct for this aggro list, or does it hinder our turn 1 plays?
So it's kind of both. It's both correct and it does hinder. It's correct in the sense that you need that many white sources and everything else is going to be a tapped land anyway, so why not get another creature out of the deal? And that's really why there's 3 of them. I would love if Raucous Carnival was better, and it just isn't. It just isn't. And most of the time it's coming in as a tapped land. I'm really close to going up to the 4th Bivouac anyway and just saying, okay, we're not going to rely on Carnival occasionally coming into play untapped. We're just going to get our 4 creature lands out of this deal and use them to... Honestly, it gets through a lot. You get to these moments in the games where you hit the turn 5, turn 6, and they've killed the creatures you've presented, and then you just start running away with Bivouac. And it also triggers Valiant, which isn't a small thing for a deck with that 12-mouse package. So, personally, I like it because it's the best of the bad options.
That's true. It does trigger Valiant. Very notable. Okay, let's talk about the list that's typically on top, but now, right in second, Dimir Aggro.
apologize for butchering this name. Mikko Araksinen came in second place at the Arena Championship with Dimir Aggro, highlighting the next stage in the deck's evolution while smashing mirrors and red-based aggro decks until the finals, and let's look at how they pulled it off here. Now, I think it's worth noting, everybody looks at Mockingbird and they're like, why? Why? Because if you're playing in a world with Dimir Aggro mirrors, this is Spyglass Sirens 5 and 6. It also does a nice job of turning into extra Flood Pit Drowners, Masterminds, and occasionally a Curiosity, although that death trigger doesn't work the way you think it does. We tested that one out for fun on Arena, and nope, doesn't come back as Enduring Curiosity that lets you keep drawing cards. However, it's flexible, it's good against the mirror. I think that's a big part of why this list went the way it did. As you can see here, we've got Nowhere to Run. I think this was another big push to keep Boros Auras out of Arena Championships, and also mess with the Gruul lists that are on Snakeskin Veil, Innkeeper's Talent. Like, this just doesn't care about any of that, and it gets through so efficiently, and that's why I think it took the place of Anoint with Affliction.
Okay. I do see some spice in the sideboard with the Azure Beastbinders. How do we best utilize this card, and what matchups does it come in for?
When it comes to Azure Beastbinder, I'll be dead honest with you. I'm not totally comfortable with that in the list in the first place. I think it does a really good job of allowing you to get Kaido and Enduring Curiosity pushed through, but only if you're not facing a wall of removal. And with so much aggression in the format, I feel like there is that wall of removal pretty consistently, where you're like, in this format, with so much of the 12 mouse package running around, every deck has to be killing things on turns 1, 2, and 3. And because of that, Azure Beastbinder to me looks like it's a little rough in comparison, because you're trying to stick it for a turn before it really has an impact. And if you fail to do so, it's just a 1/3 that doesn't do much. And there are occasionally scenarios where Azure Beastbinder does nothing, where you're playing it up against swarm strategies, and they just don't care at all. So I don't love this card, but I think if it comes in anywhere, it's going to come in against the mirror, it's going to come in against red-based aggro, where you're trying to mitigate some of their better threats. And whether or not that works, I'm a little bit leery of it, but maybe it could be a thing.
That's fair. That's totally fair. Let's talk now about another aggressive deck, Gruul Aggro.
Oh, Gruul Aggro. Just when we thought we were done with this deck, it comes roaring back, wins an Arena Championship. Kaisuke Sato, again, sorry if I butchered the name, took down the Arena Championships with Gruul Aggro, finalizing the latest version of the deck with a flourish. Let's talk through some of this card selection here. Now, you may notice only 2 Screaming Nemesis in this list instead of the usual 4, and there's more Questing Druids. I think a big part of why this list developed the way it did is the idea that there was going to be a lot of black-based mid-range with a shitload of removal. And it said we cannot rely on Screaming Nemesis to get through this wall of removal. So we need to have Questing Druid to give us a little bit more card advantage. We need to be able to see more cards in the game. We need to be able to go deeper into the deck. And we need to be able to scale. And this does all of those things. So I think that's really where this went. I like that they only went on 2 Innkeeper's Talent, because multiples of that card are rarely efficient in a deck that's as aggressive as this. You know, this isn't the old Golgari talent list where you're trying to get talent stuck and landed and all the way upgraded so you can combo off with a Vraska. This is just a benefit. You know, this is just trigger Valiant, give your things ward, run away with the game slowly but surely in a snowball motion. And that means 2 feels good, 4 feels crowded at times.
Okay. Feels like this deck is responding to Dimir by going a little bit lower. What does this deck do right versus the Dimir heavy meta right now?
I think it diversifies the threat base. I think it does a really good job with that because it has the Forges in the sideboard. It's got Questing Druid for card advantage. It's got 7 early removal spells to keep Dimir from starting that snowball effect where they go into turn 3 Kaido into Curiosity. So it does a really good job at stutter stepping Dimir. And it presents still the 12 mouse package that they have to deal with. Every single one of those cards starts running away with the game so quickly. And that's kind of the point of this, is this diversification of threats means Dimir has to have the right answers at the right time or you run right through them. So I really like where they went with this.
Okay. Fair enough. Let's talk about the last list in our Tier 1 archetypes. Surprise for me, Jeskai Convoke.
Oh, yeah. Katsuhika Hasegawa made it to the semifinals of the Arena Championships before falling to Dimir in what was a thriller of a match. Let's look at what shifted. 4 Mockingbirds in the main. Clockwork Percussionist got cut, and I think that's because it was just a little too easy to fizzle your Gleeful Demolitions by killing the Clockwork Percussionist, and it led to some awkward game states there. Again, Dimir's also around. So if they have Spyglass Siren, those Mockingbirds look a lot better because now it's like you get to play potentially 8 copies of Spyglass Siren in the main. And that's really good when you have Gleeful Demolition and Warden of the Inner Sky. So I like Mockingbird here. I don't know that 4 copies sticks around after this week. We may drop it down to 2, but I think at least 2 copies of Mockingbird will be a staple in this archetype moving forward. The fact that it can copy Imidane's Recruiter is also huge. You can have those turns now where you go, okay, let's Imidane's for like 12, 13 points, and then just do it again next turn. They can't keep containing this. So I like where they went with that. Overall, the sideboard is clean, it's crisp, it's doing what it's supposed to. You're working against sweepers eloquently, you've got early removal, and those rest in pieces, again, in a world where Simic Terror is on the rise and Temur Otters won't quite back down, those start looking better and better.
Oh yeah, the graveyard decks are back. So how do you feel about the Sheltered by Ghosts in the main here, especially against all the single target removal?
I don't love Sheltered by Ghosts if we're going to go up against black-based mid-range with regularity. It's a little awkward there because they have so much removal that they're just going to kill whatever you landed on. And I think that's where you get those Destroy Evils. I think that's where you do look at maybe Torch the Tower as a 1 or a 2 of, depending on it. Like if you're up against Golgari, for instance, Torch the Tower gains a lot of points because it can kill Glissa, and it can kill Dread Knight, and it can kill Elves. And those are 3 things you want off the board. But it's probably like a 2-2 split where you bring in a couple Torches and a couple of Destroy Evils for the 4 Sheltered by Ghosts, because the Destroy Evil against Preacher, Shelly, Sentinel, these are important plays as well. So you just kind of split the removal base and keep pushing. But I don't love it against black-based mid-range because they're going to have so much removal that you're basically begging for a 2-for-1 at that point.
Yeah, that's essentially how I play it as well against the black-based mid-range. All right, very good. Well, that wraps up our Tier 1 archetypes. Let's go ahead and jump down to Tier 2, where I'll start with Mono Red Aggro. Jose Roman took down a 42-player RCQ in Spain this past weekend with Mono Red Aggro, skewing the green splash entirely as they went with the tried and true Get 'em Dead Red methodology. Let's take a look at what changed. We see here 3 Nemesis in the main. That card has become all important recently, especially with it having haste. We do have a 13th 1-drop that scales here in Kellen, Planar Trailblazer. Haven't seen this card up until now. I like the idea of having this card that scales here, especially if you're trying to go lower than Dimir. 3 copies of Lithomanic Barrage back. Obviously, we're starting to see a little bit of play from Oculus, from Convoke. You want to hit their Knight Errants. You want to hit that initial creature right off the rip. We're seeing also a split here, 2-1 Sunspine to Forge. Perhaps Forge is starting to recede a little bit because of Authority of the Consuls. That's the only reason I can really think of. And shifting over to Sunspine, maybe for the greedy mana bases. So interesting choice here in the sideboard for that.
So, Max, I look at this, and like you said, there's only 1 Forge. Does this signal that Red just can't afford to be running Urabrask's Forge in the sideboard right now, or is it signaling anything else?
Honestly, I think it's signaling that we're seeing Authority of the Consuls. We're seeing Zer's Domain, for example, come back into play. We're seeing an uptick of that card. That's really what I think it is. I still, though, think that Forge is playable in the sideboard. Not every deck's going to be running that card. Just a handful of decks are, especially in your matchups where you want to grind, you want to go, you want to be able, to essentially grind against a black-based mid-range. So Golgari, Dimir. I still think 3 Forge is advisable for that reason.
Fair. And like you said, let's talk a little bit about Domain and those pesky Authority of the Consuls, because they're back, baby.
Oh yeah. Ryan Salas made it to the semifinals of a wild 41-player RCQ in Texas over the weekend with Zer and the Overlord Friends. So let's see how they pulled it off. Look, we're up to 3 copies of Split Up in the main now. And that's just a testament to the fact that the card works really well against aggressive decks. Authority of the Consuls also works really well here, paired with it. 4 copies in the sideboard. That's wild, which is probably a better decision than when I had it in the main board. I like this card in the sideboard instead. Beza's back. 2 copies of Beza in the sideboard, signaling a little bit of a grind fest that we're starting to run into in some of our matchups. Also, 2 copies of Stonebrain. Interesting to see that card back in utility. I mean, I used to think about running that card, but it was unadvisable personally for me and my deck choices because it really just slowed down what Zer Domain is trying to do, in my opinion. But there are some sticky, tricky cards that you want to really hedge against, especially with Dimir shifting the way that it has. So I like where this deck is. I've been saying week after week that this deck needs to hedge against aggro, and I believe with these cards, it's hedging both against the grindy mid-range and the aggressive decks.
So I look at this, Max, and does Xur's Domain actually need blue Overlord in the main, or are we just is it just there because of Xur at this point?
I feel like it's just there because of Xur. But honestly, last week, I talked about having the single red Overlord in this deck, and I like that card because it makes such a big impact, really taking out quite a few targets. But also Xur activating it, I mean, that's an impactful play right there. I'm gonna say I would rather see two red Overlords. It's a Beanstalk deck, so it's going to be able to draw cards pretty readily. I think with the mana base, red isn't that hard to hit with the way that we're playing Verges, since we've gone ahead and dive straight into playing Verges with this deck. So the mana base for me is super flexible. I think you can go Naya instead of Bant, and really Beanstalk just makes it to where you're already drawing cards. So I think the blue Overlord might be a little bit redundant here.
No, I'm with you on that one. Honestly, I keep looking at the blue Overlord and I'm like, it's cute, but like, how often do you play it on turn 3 and get run the hell over by a screaming nemesis? Like it's such a liability in so many scenarios, and the format's just fast right now. But speaking of cards where blue Overlord isn't going to do jack shit, let's talk about Simic Terror.
Asdrun Alexander made it to the top 8 of the 7th Arena Championship with Simic Terror. Reminding everyone really that crabs are still a problem in all shapes and sizes. But let's dive in. We're starting to notice a light black splash in this deck, really going the way of Rona's Vortex as a 4-of, which is wild to me, but I think this card makes sense in light of the sort of aggression that we're seeing from other decks. Herbology Instructor really does stick the landing here, really does help against the red-based aggro. Basically, another nowhere to run kind of effect. And we have that card as well. We're also seeing an uptick in Ghost Vacuum. Obviously, the graveyard play is back. We're seeing mirror matches. Simic Terrors become popular. We're seeing Otters. We're seeing Oculus. So I think Ghost Vacuum is very much warranted here in this deck. And I mean, this deck is a classic. It honestly just wants to tempo, draw lots of cards, and overwhelm the opponent. Really a grind fest kind of deck.
So, Max, they opted for a black splash. I've seen a red splash too. Which one do you think is stronger and why?
I think it really just comes into a meta-dependent decision, right? So the black splash is kind of preferable because we're really wanting to have our single target removal, pick apart the opponent's board. However, if you're starting to run into a lot of swarm strategies such as Convoke, you might want to go over to the red splash and go to Pyroclasm. So I think it's just a meta-dependent decision at the end of the day.
That's fair. It's where do you want to hedge your bets with Simic, and that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of decks that are trying to figure out where the hell to hedge all their bets, let's talk about Golgari Demons.
Oh boy, Golgari Demons. I have to say this deck is having a bit of an identity crisis in recent weeks, but Hirohata Tomoya still took down a 24-player Champions Cup qualifier in Japan with Golgari Demons, despite the recent decline in the archetype. So let's look at how this deck is positioned now. You're starting to see, right, Preacher of the Schism become sort of the draw engine. We're starting to see that change take place right before our eyes. 3 Shellys in the main, no Archfiends at all. The card has honestly just become a liability in some matchups. 1 Virtue of Persistence making its way to the main board. Really like this card, especially if you're ramping with elves, being able to get to 7 and actually cast the other side. 2 copies of Vivian Reed also in the sideboard. Very interesting card. I do like that -3. Hits a wide variety of targets. 1/1 Gix's Command and Harvester of Misery split also in the sideboard. Gix's Command is just, I mean, it really just changes the dynamic of the matchup versus, Jeskai Convoke versus a lot of these aggressive decks. So I can definitely see why that card is warranted.
Yeah, Demons is trying to figure out what to do. And I think it's having the same identity crisis that Domain is having, where they're sitting there like, all right, I've got all these 4 and 5 drop things that are so powerful that we can be doing. And the format goes, you're not going to get to turn 5. We're not doing turn 5. And they're just trying to like, okay, then how do we deal with that without losing all the points that made it worthwhile to play the mid-range deck? And the person who solves that is going to be well set in Atlanta, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But let's move it right along. Let's get to Brewer's Corner. Love this segment. We've only got 2 today. We're keeping it nice and short and sweet because we found 2 very cool lists, and we just want to talk about those. So, Max, why don't you take off with Mono Black Skeletons?
Woohoo! Mono Black Skeletons, love playing this deck. Very fun, and I like this iteration of the deck, honestly. We're seeing a 2-2 split here between Duress and Cut Down. I think Duress is just a necessity right now, just with the way that there's a lot of disruption. They're going to try to disrupt your curve out. 4 copies of Forsaken Miner, and we're relying on 3 copies of Tiny Bones for Skeletons in the 1-drop slot as well. I like the return of Deep Cavern Bat. I think with some of the combos, some of the tempo decks we're starting to see, like Simic Terror, Otters, I think you need this card to disrupt the opponent to really, get their combo pieces out of their hand. 4-2-2 split between Go for the Throat, Nowhere to Run, and Childred's Edict, showcasing the fact that there's just a variety of targets to hit right now in Standard. And the format's really sped up, so disruption is very important. 4 copies of Gix, in addition to the Corpses of the Lost over there in the 3-drop slot. Gix coming back is an indication that we're just going all out aggressive here, hoping to curve out. And notable 3 copies of Demolition Field, there for the Gisa, there to commit crimes once Gisa hits the field. I think that's really one reason why the card is there.
That's fair, and credit to Ricky Lynn, top 8'd a Texas RCQ with this list, so it's got some chops if it's making it to the top 8s of large RCQs. I think there's further experimentation to be done with it, but I want to highlight really briefly what you talked about there, how there's that split and removal where you're seeing Nowhere to Run, you're seeing Shelly's Edict, you're seeing Go for the Throat, and I think that is indicative of a more healthy format because you're seeing diversification of threats. You're not just seeing the same thing over and over and over. You're seeing different pieces that have to be adjusted. And that's also what makes it difficult to be in mid-range right now. Do you have the right answer for the right threat? That's not a given anymore, right? You can't just pack 4 Go for the Throat in and say, we're fine, we kill everything. Like, no, you don't. Not anymore, you don't. So, alrighty. Let's move it right along and talk about Golgari Roots. All right, Casey Webster, top 8, Texas RCQ, credit there. This is an interesting version of Golgari Roots. They did not run I believe there's an Osteomancer Squirrel that is commonly run, and I believe they just eschewed it entirely from this. But again, this top 8'd in RCQ, there is some merit to it. And I will say Ghost Vacuum against Roots is not the best idea, because I don't know if you've actually sat down and read Roots, but if they just take creatures, they give you plant tokens. Like, they can't just exile 1 at a time. That is what you want them to be doing, frankly. They're doing your job for you if they're on Ghost Vacuum. So you need like Rest in Peace to shut down decks like this. And this is at its core a combo deck. You're trying to get a Thrill Seeker under a Soul Cauldron and dump it onto some creatures and just smack them in the teeth with that, because this is effective, and when you have Roots going, you're just bumping the power level over and over and over again until they sack. And because they have +1/+1 counters, Agatha's Soul Cauldron triggers whether or not they've actually targeted it with the Soul Cauldron. So you get to use the benefits of the Cauldron without actually having to have triggered and hit the plant token. It's a cool idea. I think it, again, needs some work, needs some evolution to really hit the next stage, but the fact that the pieces are already here for what is arguably a tier 1.5 deck, Max, tells me that in the future, if we get a couple more pieces out of the next set, this could make the jump. And that's worth noting as we get closer to Atlanta.
Yeah, and I love the resilience to your typical anti-graveyard strategies here as well. That's really cool.
Absolutely. And that's going to bring us to our finale, folks. Now, Max and I, we've been at this for a couple of years now, and this is our final episode of 2024. We just want to say thank you to everyone out there supporting the MTG Rebellion.
Thank you so much. And, 2 years ago, this Rebellion was a dream that Rictus, ICPJs, and myself began building. We really weren't sure what form it would take in the end, but we knew that we wanted to revitalize the competitive community.
Since then, we've created an esports analysis show for Magic, we built a digital game store on a Discord server, and we created a competitive team.
Oh yeah, and in 2025, we look forward to unveiling the next step forward for the Rebellion, so stay tuned as we continue our journey. Feel free to join us down there in the Discord server, link in the description. That Discord server really has become a communal hub for competitive players around the globe.
We'll be back next year with more analysis after we get back from Spotlight Atlanta. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. Every click helps grow your community. And until next year, Rebels, untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.